Good morning. I'm Sandy Cashmark, Executive Director, extending a welcome from Central Minnesota Manufacturers Association and from Tri-State Manufacturers Association. Along with AMFA, our three associations would like to take a moment to express appreciation for the members that invested in sponsorship this year. COVID-19 has certainly disrupted typical sponsor involvement, so I'm using this opportunity to say thank you. For the past few weeks, my office has partnered with MPMA to provide webinar content that is especially relevant for manufacturers. Thank you for joining us today for session 7, featuring discussion about turning these challenging times into opportunity. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. This is Steve Kalina, President and CEO of the Minnesota Precision Manufacturing Association. Without being able to meet in person, it's tougher to give our sponsors a shout out, but it's important to recognize that all our partners do make our association successful. I hope you all consider these companies as your business partners. All right, I'm continuing to recommend that all companies connect with other similar businesses and utilize Medical Alley, Minnesota Chamber, and Minnesota or MPMA's resource exchange platform in order to support each other. Whether you need resources or you need work, it's imperative to start that communication now and build those relationships as it becomes imperative that companies are going to have to start working together. And on some legislative updates, on a related note to what I was just talking about, legislation is being proposed to protect companies from litigation related to personnel exposure to COVID-19, as well as protection from for companies that may produce defects as they ramp up to support the essential COVID-19 product. Also, the Department of Labor and Industry has put out back to work guidance that all companies should review. And lastly, the SBA will be giving out more guidance on PPP forgiveness, hopefully yet this week. And just as a reminder, these webinar recordings and the PDFs can be found on MPMA's resource page as well as TSMA's. All right, so on to our main topic. On a daily basis, we've been hearing about all the challenges and struggles related to the virus, but manufacturers are used to challenges, and it is the ingenuity, determination, and creativity that makes manufacturers so talented in solving problems. Sam Wagner of SCI LLC, the Science of Continuous Improvement and Training, will share some exciting and innovative approaches organizations have taken to join in the fight. He'll also share process improvements that have moved businesses forward, while many are taking steps back. Lastly, he'll talk about what we should expect as some new norms, good or bad, coming out of these challenges. Sam?
So thank you, Steve, and Sandy, and the organizations, the sponsoring organizations shown on the screen there. Appreciate the opportunity here to talk about the manufacturers turning challenges into opportunities. And there's a little bit of my background for those of you who don't know me. I know I saw several familiar names signing in to the webinar today, so thank you for signing in. So I've been in manufacturing primarily in the tri-state area here for 20 of the last 30 years anyway, and I'm a certified lean leader as well as certified trainer in a whole bunch of different topics. So the agenda that I'd like to go through today is three phase. The first phase is to look at what are some improvements that are being made, born out of the necessity of our current environment, and then maybe a little learning on how these improvements might relate to something we call Toyota Kata, and the principles related to that. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And then how do we prepare for going forward with the new norm? So first, I'd like to discuss, talk a little bit about something that's a little more on a personal side. I'd like to talk about an organization called Helping Hands of Alexandria. And Helping Hands was started by a couple of dynamic young women in Alexandria, Natil Dahmer and Kelsey Malone, who started this grassroots movement as an expression of their faith in helping. And you can see on the left-hand side of the screen there, an article that came out in the Echo Press about mask makers. So these masks are just one of the many outreach projects that are being coordinated through the Helping Hands of Alexandria, but it's one that's touched me pretty closely. And as you can see here, this is why it's touched me fairly closely. This is my wife. My wife Cindy is using her sewing skills to help with the needs that have been identified through the Helping Hands of Alexandria. And you can see a couple of the masks there on the bottom, a couple of different styles that she started out making for some of the service organizations and essential workers, those in essential services. And now the Helping Hands of Alexandria has actually made 16,000 of these masks and distributed them throughout, and they're now starting to distribute them to individuals throughout the community. And I know this effort starting here has also gone into other communities doing similar kinds of things, but it's really a great example of how we're helping each other through these times. And actually this has evolved even from this. This has evolved in a manner where now my wife Cindy is making N95 equivalent masks for our medical personnel in the emergency rooms and in other areas of our local hospital. So thank you, Cindy, and thank you to the Helping Hands of Alexandria and all those other organizations throughout the region here that are doing this kind of thing to help in this situation. So when I was asked by Steve and Sandy if I would consider doing this, I thought, well, I better go talk to some people throughout the region here and see what they're doing to adapt, and maybe what new products they're coming out with. And I talked to some of my friends very close to my home here in Alexandria at Donnelly Custom Manufacturing, and they said, oh yeah, you've been wearing some of those masks. Do your ears ever get sore from the straps going around there? And I had to admit that not yet. I hadn't worn mine enough to be able to do that. But for a lot of people who are having to wear these masks a lot, that is a problem. And so they came up with something that is a new product, I guess, to be able to help with that particular problem. And so that plastic strap there, and really they're not using it as a new product. They're using it more as community service. So they're providing these at no charge to those who want them in the community. But again, an example. Thank you, Donnelly, and my friends at Donnelly there for sharing this with me and sharing with me one of their new products that are coming out. Now they have had other customer requests for some new products that are coming out there as a custom contract manufacturer. They don't have their own products, of course, but they are finding that some of their customers are looking for a little bit different products, some new twists on some existing products to be able to help in the situation. And so they are adapting in that way with some new products. And there are many other companies that are also adapting with new products. Here's one from a company, Versailles Solutions, a Minneapolis maker of room and cubicle partitions, and they've developed this new product, a sneeze shield that they are now selling and developing. And again, they are not the only one. Many new products are coming out at this time. Here's one from Exhibit Max, Twin City-based event engineering and fabrication company, and they saw a need for these isolation systems to help hospitals meet potentially higher requirements for quarantine. And so some other examples of how companies are adapting and bringing out new products. Some additional examples. Here's one of a way of adapting with new partnerships. You know, I mentioned the Helping Hands of Alexandria. That could kind of be considered a new partnership as well. Here's a great partnership between the Dunwoody College of Technology, Stratasys, a 3D printing and prototyping company, and Woodchuck, a wood manufacturing company. And they've combined their resources and partnership to be able to make these face shields. And so a great example of adapting to using new partnerships. And of course, we've heard about partnerships from some of the larger companies in the area too, 3M teaming up with Ford to build air purifying respirators. So another great example of new partnerships coming out of these times. We're also adapting processes. And here's an example of the Vermilla companies, a headquarters in St. Paul, that has adapted their printing processes and the equipment that they're using for that into, again, using face shields. We also have examples throughout the region, throughout the area. Chaska-based MyPillow is using their resources to make masks, as well as Gemini Athletic Wear of Edina, and many others helping to make masks. Our distilleries, such as our local distillery here, Panther Distillery in Osakis, as well as ethanol producers and other distilleries, are transitioning their production to industrial strength alcohol used in hand sanitizers to help with the shortage of hand sanitizers. We have other companies such as Wyoming Machine and Twin City Die Castings that are making components for ventilators and healthcare prototypes for other companies. And another example of this is Chandler Industries. Chandler has three facilities, three of their facilities in Minnesota have partnered and teamed up. Their Montevideo facility had been making ventilator components as well, and was overwhelmed with the order quantities. And so they turned to their other facilities, one in Long Prairie and the other one in Bethel, Minnesota, to help them to be able to meet the demand. And so another way that a local company here has adapted their existing resources to adapt to the situation. And so now I'd like to give you, so we've talked about adapting, we've adapted processes, we've adapted products, and we've adapted in our partnerships. And now I'd like to give you an example, a little more detailed example now of how one company has adapted with improving some processes. And so Alexandria Industries here in Alexandria was looking at overcoming their problem that they had of their saw and punch cell was currently taking 2 people to operate, and those 2 people had to work in close proximity. And so this became a problem, and they decided to use the job methods technique from training within industry to see how much, if they could identify ways to do this overall job with one person without losing too much productivity. And so they, their overall goal was to reduce then from 2 people to 1 person in this particular work cell. And so they applied job methods being a practical plan to help you produce greater quantities of quality products in less time by making the best use of the manpower, machines, and materials now available. And this comes out of training within industry, and as all of the skill components of training within industry, this is a 4-step method and comes with a reminder card of those 4 steps that you can use. And the method reminds us that we should ask questions of every detail of the job. We need to break down that job and then question the details. And when we ask why is that step necessary? What's the purpose? When we think of that, we can think of ideas for how we might eliminate some of the details and some of the steps in the process. When we ask the questions, where's the best place to do this? When should it be done? And who's best qualified to do this? We can find ways to combine and rearrange the job. And finally, we ask how is the best way to do the job and each of the details. And that gives us ideas for how we might simplify the job. So Alec Industries and Mike Hurley helped break down this particular job, and working with the operators in the area, identified for this problem using this approach, came up with these kinds of results. The cell now takes 1 person to do the job, so they were able to break it down so that 1 person could do the job. And they also found, surprisingly, that they could have better ergonomics and had better quality coming out of it from that, because they were sawing only 2 pieces at a time instead of 4. And so the quality of the cut was better. And they also found that through using this job methods improvement, they not only got from 2 people to 1 person, but they also improved the overall productivity of this particular area. So this is a great example of how we can use those methods and those skills that we have and have available to us to be able to look to solve some of the problems that are coming to us, but not only solve those problems, but make improvements at the same time. And so we've looked at improving. We've looked at improving through adapting products, adapting processes, and through partnerships, through new partnerships. And now let's look at how these might relate to something we call the Toyota Kata principles. And so this is a diagram of the model of the improvement kata. Kata, as you see in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, kata just simply being patterns that we practice to learn and develop a skill. And the improvement kata has 4 steps to it. These 4 steps are really just a scientific thinking pattern, a pattern to achieve a goal that we're not quite sure how to achieve at this time. And so we start with number 1 in the upper right-hand corner, understanding the long-term direction. This might be in the long term in terms of 3 months to even a couple of years down the road. And second, then we look to be clear on the current condition. You see that in the lower left-hand corner. So where are we headed long term, and where are we now? And then we look to establish a near-term target condition. This near term might be a week away, it might be a few weeks away. But a short-term target condition that we're not quite sure how to achieve at this particular point. We may have some ideas on how to get there, but we know that there are many obstacles in the way to getting to that target condition. And the crooked line going from the step 2 to step 3 is representative of those obstacles that are in the way of achieving that target condition. And then fourth, how do we maneuver our way through those obstacles? And we do that through experimenting toward that target condition, using plan, do, check, and adjust cycles on every one of the obstacles that we come across in terms of achieving that target condition. So this area here that I've just shown, this gray area, this gray zone, is are those obstacles and that pathway that's beyond our current knowledge threshold. You see those green lines, those green curved lines, those are the learner's knowledge threshold. And the first green line there is the initial knowledge threshold of the learner. And so the learner understands how to overcome the obstacles up to that point, but beyond that is not quite sure how to do that. And it's through experimenting then on each one of those obstacles that the learner learns how to overcome that obstacle and move closer and closer toward that target condition. And so that's what those additional green lines are. As we move through the obstacles and learn how to overcome each of those obstacles, we get closer and closer to the target condition. And our knowledge threshold expands and we learn. And so this is the pattern that we practice to learn to navigate in this unknown territory. This unknown territory is very much like the territory we feel ourselves in today. And so you also see that there's a second kata here. This first kata is the improvement kata. The second kata is shown with the coach. And so there's a coach that goes with us through our learning and helps to provide momentum for us to move through beyond our knowledge threshold, to overcome the obstacles, to learn how to overcome those and reach and achieve one target condition after another. As we achieve the first target condition, we set the next one, aligned to and closer to the overall direction or overall challenge that we're trying to accomplish. And so this overall pattern of scientific thinking is a pattern that many of us are using to help us to understand how to navigate in the gray zone. So the coach helps guide us in using this pattern. So here's a little close-up view of the gray zone area. You can see that we can see the next target condition. We understand where that is, where we want to go, where we need to go through this gray zone. And the knowledge threshold is shown by the bar right there. So everything to the left then of the knowledge threshold is our predictable zone. we can predict where we're going there. To the right are the obstacles that help take us through and navigate the unclear territory. And so this is the unpredictable gray zone area. And this is the zone where we do our learning. So what we need to keep in mind as we're walking our way through learning in this unclear territory is that no plan is going to cover everything in terms of achieving our target condition. And we need to be okay with that, that it's okay not to be able to have every detail of the plan understood before we move forward. We're going to learn as we go, and as we go, we will learn how to better and better how to navigate that unclear territory. And so these are some of the patterns that and principles that we can use to work our way through these times. And so now I'd like to talk about how we might prepare for what some of the new norms might be, new norms that we need to be prepared for moving forward. And certainly we know that we'll probably be having more remote work as we move forward. And so if we take that into account, we'll look and we've already seen this with many of our organizations, that we have more online meetings, that we're using online resources more and more. We're having fewer face-to-face meetings, but we still need those face-to-face meetings, but we'll find ways to do more remote work. We've already found ways to do that. Cleanliness, PPE, and social distancing may be things that become new norms for us. And finally, flexibility and adaptability and responsiveness are not going to go away. They're going to be more and more needed as we move forward. So let's take a little look at each of these in a little bit more detail. When we look at remote work, we see that one of the things to consider as we move forward with more and more remote work is that we need to consider how this affects our employee motivation. And there's a study that's recently been done by the Harvard Business Review, or published in the Harvard Business Review. And one of the things it identifies is that those who have a choice on where to work are more motivated than those who have no choice. Now, this probably doesn't come as a lot of surprise to you, but when we think about it, we can think about how can we give our people at least some choice as to what parts of their work they can work online and what parts of their work they can work in an office environment. And if they have that choice, at least to some extent, they'll be more motivated. But another more interesting piece to this is those that are allowed to experiment or solve meaningful problems. You can see a dramatic difference here in how much more motivated people are if they are allowed to experiment and solve meaningful problems. Well, they're in any kind of an environment, let alone the type of environment now. So what really matters here? What can we take away on this? We really need to think about making sure that our people can have as much choice as we can give them on where to work and their work life, as well as making sure that we're using principles and patterns like Toyota Kata that allow them to experiment and to learn and to solve meaningful problems. A second interesting piece I found was that the real estate brokerages are finding that there's a shift to rural areas out of the dense urban areas. And interestingly, that this may be a profound psychological change. How might this affect our abilities to recruit people, and in terms of what our workforce of the future is going to look like? So another thing to consider as we're looking into the future. So as we look at possible benefits then of adapting here, what are the benefits of having more remote work? Well, it could be that we might need less facility space in our overall operations. We probably could have a wider recruitment area if more of the work can be done remotely. Certainly, we could have less traffic. That could be good for all of us. And there's a potential for higher employee motivation. Again, if we use those factors of choice and kata. As well, when we look at cleanliness, PPE, and social distancing, what benefits might that have for us? Well, certainly we could have a healthier workplace, maybe less overall absenteeism, but we also probably have the potential for better physical organization, especially if we look at this as part of our overall 5S efforts and the cleanliness as we're cleaning, looking for those things that need to be perhaps replaced or repaired. So there is potential if we use this for better physical organization. And finally, the flexibility, adaptiveness, and responsiveness that we're already seeing and that we'll have to continue to use will help us all be better, stronger organizations, better to respond to the dynamic conditions that are in our world today. And so I'd like to wrap up then with these are some of the challenges that companies are looking to turn into opportunities, improving through improving products, improving processes, and improving partnerships. And finally, learning how improvements can be made, learning to use things like job methods, using to learn things like Toyota Kata. And finally, preparing for those new norms that we may need to be prepared for going forward. And so again, I'd like to thank our sponsoring organizations and thank each of you for tuning in today. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Steve. And Steve, you let's see.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, you can feel free to submit them in the chat function. I've got a couple here for you, Sam.
Okay.
You know, as the business leaders and owners are trying to kind of keep things held together right now and keeping people busy and safe and figuring out financials and making sure they make payroll, any advice for how they can focus their people on improvement projects?
Yeah, I think, you know, again, people still are looking, they're feeling more motivated if they can find important projects, if they're working on important projects to the organization. And so no matter what that project might be related to be able to look at it from a scientific thinking approach. I think, you know, people, if you go into it with that mindset of, hey, we've got this particular problem that we need to resolve within our business now, looking at expanding the scope of that, maybe to think about how do we make this, how can we look at the other factors within this particular problem that we might be able to improve at the same time that we're looking at addressing the problem. So I think it's really just looking at it from a little wider perspective and giving our people those opportunities to use their problem-solving skills.
So kind of leading out of that, you know, you talked about, of course, projects that can be important and motivating. A lot of companies have taken advantage of the SBA's PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, which kind of is a balance of, you know, keeping people on board and engaged, but yet, you know, even if maybe workload is low. Any thoughts on how companies should balance the safety of their people in bringing them into work, but yet, you know, still working on projects like this?
Yeah. I mean, certainly, you know, we have to make sure that safety is first. Safety of our people have to be acknowledged first. And so again, the social distancing, you know, I know companies are taking temperatures of employees before allowing them into the facilities, using things like the safety screens that we kind of saw. I know when I talked to Donnelly earlier, they talked about how they're still doing a lot of their training, you know, that they need to do in-house, but they're putting up some of those screens and they're using more technology a little bit more online to be able to help with continuing to train people, but making sure that they're doing it in a safe way so that everybody is safe in their work environment. And so, yeah, again, you know, certainly in my business as well, more online training is definitely a trend, but we have to be really careful about that. We do it in a manner that's still effective. And so I know that's something I'm working on, and I know that a lot of my colleagues are doing the same kind of thing.
One of our attendees just asked about top priority projects that we're seeing, and I think that probably changes weekly. I mean, obviously, a few weeks ago, the masks and hand sanitizer were probably top priorities, and now it's maybe a mix of that, and then ventilators, of course. But you know, so I think you already shared quite a few examples of some of those companies that are working on those projects, and you know, I've talked to a lot of companies lately, and quite a few are already hurting, where workload's been cut, you know, 40, 60%. But yet there's quite a few companies that are still very busy, and I think it just comes down to the marketplace you're the market you're in, and so of course there's still essential products out there, and I think it's easy to think about the ventilators and face masks, but there's plenty of other products that are needed every day and need to keep going. So I think it's probably ebbing and flowing, but I think as we see some of the non-essential stuff drop off that maybe should have dropped off weeks ago, the essential products are just as important.
Yeah, and I think as you mentioned earlier, Steve, the keeping in contact, those partnerships are going to be really important, and being creative with how we can use the resources that we have available to us, and finding those partnerships. I know we've done those kinds of things in the past with different organizations, helping each other, and finding where one company has a need and another company has extra resources to find ways to work together to help. And I know companies will continue to do that in, again, adapt in creative and innovative ways.
So one question I've got for you, I've always struggled dealing with the offsite work. I think that it brings a lot of advantages, but one of the concerns I've always had is, in communication and teamwork. So, if you start getting the lean initiatives and then, having a Kaizen event or just working together to solve problems, can you speak to that aspect? Just your opinion, I guess, of working from home and how that affects teamwork and the ability to communicate with your peers?
Yeah, well, it's definitely harder. My son works for a company called Make You Safe, and I asked him about this, and he said yes. And he's doing a lot of project work, and in the past, and it's very fast-paced. And in the past, they're using the Agile system for doing that, and so they have a card with a certain that should take a certain amount of time to do. A card with a task on it, and the task should take a certain amount of time to do. And in the past, where they've been face-to-face and working together, they've been able to be a little looser with how they define that task, and the task has been a little larger in scope, because they were able to very quickly and easily answer those simple questions about that, make sure that their expectations were clear by clarifying things kind of as they go. And so what he's found is that he's had to back down and go to more detail in describing what those tasks are and describing his expectations, because he's having to, he's all 100% online now. And so what he's finding is that when we communicate online, the communication is more difficult, and therefore we have to be a little more detailed and more explicit in our expectations and in our descriptions of tasks. So that's one of the things that he's found, and I've seen that in the past at other organizations as well, where that communication is just a little more difficult. And so we need to be cognizant of that challenge for us, and make sure that we're as clear as we can possibly be in our communication.
Sure. So one last question here before we wrap up. One of the attendees asked, as process improvements are going to be crucial as we move things forward. Any thoughts on how technology can be of help with that?
Yeah, well, I've been thinking a lot about that because my business has been dramatically affected by this as well. And so what I've been thinking about is how do I best use the technology where the technology can help us, and of course, being off-site and providing remote training and improvement coaching can be done, and how do we minimize that and maximize the effectiveness of the time that we can spend in person. And so balancing that difference and understanding the differences there. I'm working with a couple, I'm putting some partnerships together as well, working with some others to try to best understand how we go about delivering more training online, but in a more effective way than maybe some of the online training has been in the past. How we go about doing that, again, we're still in the evolutionary phases of that, but that's, I think, what we all need to be looking toward is how do we most effectively use the capabilities that we have available to us with the technology, but understand its limitations as well.
All right, well, on that, I think we'll wrap things up. So I, of course, want to thank our speaker, Sam Wagner. And Sam, please maybe send a thank you to your wife, Cindy, for everything she's doing for the cause. And I want to thank you all for attending today. I wish you all the best in health and for you, your family, and your employees, and hope you stay busy and look forward to seeing you again, hopefully face-to-face soon. Take care.